moment. We don't respect them, strangely enough, and yet we expect them to solve every problem. And the system breaks down, people become cynical. So what have I found? Well, I am constantly amazed at how often people will pull me up in the streets and say, I heard your conversation with that person or this person or whatever. And because I try not to feed my own opinions in too much. Most people know what I think. But most of the time, I'm trying to provide a conduit for people to listen and to hear what others have got to say, when partly because of bias and positioning, a lot of views are hard to get out, and partly because it's such an instant world, the 30-second grab doesn't work. If you want to draw the great lessons out of the Gulag Archipelago, as you and I did in our first conversation, you can't do that in a 30-second grab. It's impossible. We're dumbing people down unwittingly because technology has, and the mainstream media, sort of led to that outcome. We're breaking the finances of mainstream media, of course, by doing what you and I do. And so that means that the journalistic qualities go down more and more because they don't have the resources to pay people to do really high quality investigative stuff and what have you. Anyway, I'm being long-winded, but I have learned a huge amount.
It's something worth considering and contemplating in detail, because this is a stunningly revolutionary new technology. I mean, YouTube was just kind of a novelty item when it first popped up. But the fact that everyone is now a video producer and a sophisticated video consumer, it changes the world in ways that have only barely begun to manifest themselves. And we certainly don't understand it, because the technology runs way faster than our understanding of its consequences. But it seems to me that it should become increasingly incumbent on people who have political ambitions to engage directly with the public in this manner, that should become a standard expectation of political figures and of the general population. Because if you can't handle yourself in a 90-minute conversation, if your ideas aren't well enough developed, or if you don't have the character, or you reveal your hand in some manner, well, that's something that should happen. And the fact that everything has to be condensed down, in some sense, to sound bites means that people who are good at doing that, or who have a good team to do that, they get the spoils. But it's no way to run a serious operation, and this technology is available to anyone who cares to use it now. So what have you seen? What do you understand, the understanding of political figures in Australia with regards to social media? Like, do they understand the significance of its existence, the potential that it has?
Some do. Some do. Some set up massive cynical exercises to try and control social media, to participate in, and set up movements, come with me sort of stuff, where it's all spin and it plays on the sort of hashtag type stuff. But then at the other extreme, I have been delighted and amazed at the number of people right up the political scale who listen to the conversations that I've held. And to go to the Parliament House and have a senior person from the other side of politics to the one that I was involved with, and it's happened several times, come up and say, gee, I enjoyed your podcast. That is gold to me. And then to know that there are several cabinet ministers who often tap in, particularly if I talk about defence, or if I talk about the sorts of things that you and I talk about. And then one of the things that I have noticed, though, this is an interesting one, and I've not got to the bottom of it, I don't quite understand it, is that my countrymen are more interested in listening to somebody from America or Britain than from anywhere else, including their own country. So a couple of the most important conversations that I've done, or quite a few, on defence, with our former Prime Minister, who is now the father of the nation in many ways and was widely seen that way. And yet there's relatively thin interest talking to, the conversations that you and I have had, this is actually the fourth, and it's very kind of you to have me as a guest. They have flown off the racks, so to speak, and generated huge interest. And here's the one, I know I've said this many times, so forgive me, listeners who have heard me say this, but nothing drives me on more than when I meet young men and women who are seeing through the paucity and the superficiality of what they've been fed as young Australians, and have really clicked to a deep philosophical and meaningful understanding, your point indeed, that the sort of things can only be learned through long-form discussions about why our country's different. When I was in Parliament, one of the few, I'm reasonably economically dry, one of the few subsidy arrangements that I agreed with was that we subsidised kids' schools from around Australia, so it was cheap for them, no matter how far, this is a very big country, to come to Canberra and see democracy in action. And I always used to look forward to meeting with them. It was always fascinating. So we'd have a discussion about the Parliament House and its endless corridors and the chambers and the Prime Minister and all of these sorts of things. And then I'd spring it on them. I'd say, now, how many of you were told before you came down here by your mums and dads and maybe even your teachers, oh, you're going to Canberra, are you? That place, where it's all hot air and the politicians are useless and the government's no good. And every hand would go up. That's Australia. We were once healthily sceptical, we're now downright cynical, I think, about our political processes and the people in them. But if you then said to them, okay, so if the government's making a mess of it, name me a country that you'd like to live in preference to Australia. And occasionally someone would say America, or they'd say Canada, they might say New Zealand, they'd say they're all democracies. And then we'd talk about the differences. And of course, it had never hit them. And once you start to unpack that stuff in the sort of conversations that you and I so enjoy, because I enjoy them enormously, there's a lot of people who tap into it and say, gee, that's interesting. That's really got me thinking. And was it Margaret Mead who said, societies have often been changed by just a small group of people getting together and thinking things through. Indeed, that's the only way societies have ever changed. And so what drives me on is the hope that whether they agree with me or disagree with me, even if they come out in a different place, if these conversations that we have help raise up tomorrow's leaders, well, boy, we're going to need them. And they'll have to be people of vision and courage and of insight. And nothing struck me more than that first conversation where you had, and you were quite emotional about it, you said that you'd been in Melbourne and you'd had some young men there who had